Suzanne, Megan and Lynette. And Lynn, sorry.
Okay, we ready?
Yeah, are you guys ready?
Okay.
And it's a Q&A as well. Have we got good 5-10 minutes for Q&A?
Okay, so, well, we wondered what to do with this session, really. Because what do you do when you've had such a far-ranging day like we've had? And I think that probably you'll all agree with me that it's been a really, really sort of stimulating day, and I think that probably everybody has taken away some little nugget of something that they've learned during the day. And that's always my thing about conferences, you know. Sometimes you kind of sort of think, oh, you know, what have I learned? But usually you can actually pinpoint something that you've taken away, and certainly I have today. I think we've had some really, really good sessions, and wow, it's been quite a stimulating day. So how are we going to pull it together? Well, we had a bit of a thought about this and thought actually we would bring us together as a panel. So we are internal to GLE at Coventry University, with the exception of Lynette, who is our visitor, who's come a long way today to be with us. So we thought we'd include Lynette and get our money's worth out of her while she's here. So we've included Lynette, and we thought about, you know, the sort of the title of the conference was very wide-ranging, really. And so we thought about the challenges and the opportunities. And I suppose what we've come down to is thinking about the questions that might be posed from the different thematic areas that people are involved with. So you'll see there on the screen that you've got an idea of who we are as a group. So a variety of themes are represented there. And so the questions are going to relate specifically to some of our themes. So I'm going to start off by asking Suzanne to kick us off with...
That was a surprise.
So Suzanne, wake up. So to talk about sort of projects, so project work and the challenges and the opportunities that the COVID pandemic and the post-COVID era pose for project working. And Suzanne, I think, is going to talk a little bit about a project that she's been really, really heavily involved with until more recent. Well, now. The Global Grace Project. And the question to her really is how the pandemic's affected Global Grace and the international collaborations and ways of working on the Global Grace Project. So we'll get Suzanne to talk a little bit about that. But we'd also like to throw the floor open to you. So I'm sure that as Suzanne talks, things will occur to you, questions will occur, or thoughts will occur. So we would like it to be quite a sort of a collaborative sort of final plenary session. So please, you know, do feel free to make comment or to ask questions after each of the panel members. So Suzanne, over to you.
I have a few minutes.
Don't worry, it won't be long. How do I get out of this? Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to talk very briefly about how COVID affected managing a large international research project. I'm co-director of a project called Global Gender and Cultures of Equalities, or Global Grace. It's just coming to an official end as of 31st of March, but we've still got various things going on. We're still working together. It was funded by the UK government's Global Challenges Research Fund, which is relevant. It's a project that brings together research teams of academics and NGO activists and practitioners across 6 countries, Bangladesh, Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, the Philippines and the United Kingdom. We've got 14 partner organisations, a core team of around 35 directly employed research staff or researchers based in each local research site. The core to Global Grace was that we're not flying out and doing, we're actually working with in a process of kind of participatory co-production, hopefully that's the idea, with a feminist research methodological approach and a feminist ethic of care. So Global Grace, in summary, in responding to 2 key UN Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality, SDG 5, and health and well-being, SDG 3, we drew on interdisciplinary, multisensory methodologies, arts-based research and creative activism to investigate people's everyday experiences of inequalities and together explore the variety of ways that people's creative practices challenge systems of privilege and engender new possibilities for more equitable ways of living together. That's the blur anyway. So the pandemic obviously had a huge impact on our research and our international collaboration. So I'm just going to mention a few of the challenges that we faced. First of all, in terms of maintaining international collaboration, we had built the project management from the beginning and all the dynamics around participatory kind of co-production, working together, respecting situated knowledges and expertise of everyone working as in collaboration. And we did this by building in a series of face-to-face intensive partnership and capability events, which were to be located in each of the countries that we were working in. That was to do about ensuring that everybody had the opportunity, environmental costs aside, and I do apologise for that, but everybody had the opportunity to move to a space and a place to experience a different culture, a different way of looking and being and seeing, and be together so that we could all host in our own ways the whole team. Okay. So the pandemic hit halfway through the project. So we had managed to hold a series of some partnership and capability events, and that was, thank goodness we did, because we built really serious, strong networks and friendships through that face-to-face collaboration, without which I don't think the project would have succeeded in the end. I just don't think we could have done it. I don't think we could have maintained that level of engagement, commitment and care for one another that we had developed because of that face-to-face interaction from the beginning. So when COVID hit, of course, we had to move to working online across very difficult time zones from one side of the world to the other. So it wasn't easy, but we managed to do it because of that level of care that we built up, that friendship that we built up in the beginning. But it was challenging. So we also faced a huge financial challenge overnight because the UK government decided to cut all GCRF funding overnight, which then we literally got an email to say that we were losing over £400,000, just like that. We were the lucky ones because a lot of projects had just started and they got all the funding cut from the beginning, so they just couldn't do anything. So we were lucky. We'd already done a lot of work, but it was a lot of money to lose. And so we spent a lot of time being anxious, but scrabbling around, trying to revision everything, sort out all our finances. Our priority was that our overseas international partners did not lose out. That was a key priority. And that our paid staff did not lose their jobs. So those were our two priorities, that people's livelihoods were protected. So we had to rework, and we managed it. We did it. But also, we were really concerned with health and well-being issues. So a lot of our research staff, as all of you here today probably, experienced COVID. People died, not other direct research teams, but family members. People were seriously ill. People were trying to manage people were trying to manage all of the workloads during lockdowns. They were trying to conduct research as well as they could during lockdowns. They were trying to homeschool and care. The whole thing was very difficult. But we also decided that it was really important to look beyond the research, obviously, in this crisis period. So what we tried to do was prioritise the needs of participants with whom we were working. And it's too big a project to go into too much detail, but I'll just give you a few tiny little examples. So in northern Bangladesh, we were working with socioeconomically and culturally marginalised women construction workers. Very taboo for women to work in the public sphere in a traditionally masculinised industry. So they were already quite marginalised, living in relative poverty as well. But we were working with participatory day-long workshops over a long period of time with a core group of around 12 to 16, it moved up and down, women. And we were training and working through mobile phone-based photography and filmmaking, primarily. And it was mainly about well-being and self-esteem, enhancing self-esteem, but also practical training. So with the onset of lockdown, their daily labour dried up, they had no income. So the mobile phones became a really important source of support, because we paid for the data and things like that. So women were able to contact each other, and we were able to talk, well, not me personally, but the Bangladeshi-based research team from and of the space and place were able to continue networking and talking with and to. As soon as it was relatively safe to do so, they resumed the face-to-face but socially distanced the Friday workshops, basically. And through that, we were able to provide a lot of material resources and support for the participants and their wider family and communities, calling it research. So throughout the whole of the pandemic, we provided support in that sense. In Cape Town in South Africa, we've been working with a group of on-street sex workers, to explore well-being and the circumstances of their lives in terms of kind of issues around discrimination and violence, but through theatre and performance work. Several of the participants were homeless at the time, and it felt kind of vulnerable and dangerous to be on the streets. Also, their incomes obviously dried up overnight. So we were able to use the theatre space that we'd hired with the participation of the local NGO with whom we were working to provide a safe space for the participants to be and to live, basically. And we were also able to provide material resources through research funding to support them. In the Philippines, we were working with a group of LGBTQ identified young people and also more mature identified authors and writers and poets. In the Philippines, being LGBTQ identified can be risky and dangerous. And with the onset of lockdown, the community with whom we were working felt more vulnerable because the police used it as an excuse to increase levels of violence. So again, in this context, the networks that have been created through Global Grace were able to be used to give a lot more online support, actually. It was mostly online in this case, but they were providing a lot of online support with each other, together. That was really helpful. And then finally, in Chiapas, a quick example, we were working with indigenous communities in southern Mexico, in Chiapas, and for the team, they're an indigenous NGO themselves, and so there's a long history of working with the indigenous Total communities. But they directed some resources to writing the first COVID pandemic health and safety guidelines and to translating everything into Topsil because the communities were not being spoken to. It was in Spanish and they didn't have access to TVs and press anyway. So they didn't know what was going on so clearly. They were very more concerned and more worried because if you don't know what's happening, it's much more scary. So the team there were able to work with the indigenous communities and explain what was happening in the pandemic and what the guidelines were with them. We also had some new opportunities for Global Grace impact and public engagement because we had to refocus our dissemination plans away from these whole team face-to-face events. But this meant that we devoted more time and the resources that we had to having more. We did plan local dissemination and public engagement, of course we did, but we reoriented everything to local engagement. So it was much more localised and more people actually benefited in that sense, or more people were involved in local context in terms of that than we had originally planned. This, floating across your screen, we'd already planned to do a virtual open access course. This is the English version. We're still building. We've got Bangladesh Bengali version, Spanish version, Portuguese version for the Brazil team, and English version. And with thinking about what you were talking about earlier, which was really interesting. No, I've lost you. No, well, partly, but about the translation is not. No, it was you, Adam, wasn't it? The translation is not just about translating English into something. It's not. So this course is about. It's being created. Every module is being created by the local academics and NGO practitioners in their own language. So that's what we're building here. But you can all use it. It's interesting in terms of research methods. It talks about creative practice, creative activism, all kinds of stuff like that. So you might find it of interest. It's going to be open there for everybody. As I say, the English version's up now, just launched, but everything else is coming on stream. I can't show you the Global Grace website because I've just taken it down. It's just been migrated to a new site, so it's kind of not there. But I can show you something else that we didn't plan to do, but we did because of COVID. We planned to have a physical exhibition in Cape Town at the end of the project, and inviting people in and you know, using kind of the Cape Town space, the art spaces. Instead, we created a virtual exhibition, which is here, Relocating Cultures of Equality, which again, you know, the pros of that, it's much more accessible, it's internationally available, and it's, you know, it's freely out there. So nothing lost there in that sense. So that was fine. And just to finish, I'm trying to take too much time. But just to finish, one of our UK-based researchers, Dr. Siobhan Mcguirk, who's based at Goldsmiths, she wrote this poem that I'm going to play for you, a video poem, at the point where we just found out we'd lost our funding, and she was worried about her job. We were trying to reassure her that we would make sure she didn't lose her job, but she wrote this poem for us and shared it. And one of the things that we did through the project was send postcards to one of them. I did do that.
Is it going really tight?
Just switched off.
It just switched off on me. There we
go.
One of the things that we did through the project, while some big men couldn't sort it out for me, was send postcards to one another, just to use a kind of old school way of sending stuff. And we sent photos and little messages to each other, and it was about that, and it became part of the exhibition. We did also hold kind of physical exhibitions around the world as well, but this was an exhibition that we brought together. Thank you, Luca. And this is a poem. I'm just going to finish with Siobhan speaking her video poem for you. If I put the sound on. Not loud enough, sorry. Not loud enough. Oh no, it's 100%.
There might be some controls in the video.
Is it going to, do you think it's going to play? I can read the poem otherwise. No, we're not hearing it. Oh, an exhibition device.
Wow.
Alright, let's start it back. Let's see. If it doesn't play, I'll just read it. But she doesn't.
From the very beginning, we have sent postcards, shared different sorts of writing, the personal as political, a creative method, an exhibitionary device, images chosen, forms shaped, gifts exchanged. This collaboration forges bonds. Echoes of conversations past weave new connecting threads, sometimes wires crossed, sometimes knots joyously untangled. Laughter is not lost in translation. This material culture will cross oceans and seas, shuffle through sorting places, fly wrapped in bundles, amid 1,000 other notes. Meanwhile, we stay put, locked down, in contact, not in touch. These are sentiments sent at social distance, stamped with affection, edges softened en route, cardboard challenges to the ivory tower, impact measured on landing. Now, purse strings severed, we gather our thoughts, put affairs in order, sign off, send, see you, post haste.
But what I hear there is phenomenal agility, and you know, it puts a different complexion on researcheriness, doesn't it? Really, you know, the ultimate in agility, having to adapt in those sorts of situations, and the responsibility connected with research as well. You know, when it comes down to people's jobs and people's livelihood, you know, they're big things, aren't they? So, over to you. Is there anything you'd like to ask Suzanne, or any points that you want to make? Does it resonate with you and any of your experiences during the pandemic? You've blown them all away somehow.
We spoke so fast they couldn't hear.
I think one of the things that really struck me was how what seemed like a big disaster actually became a really sort of inspiring, innovative way of getting more direct help to people. So, you know, it was horrendous what was going on, but in a way, by not having the route you were planning to do, actually maybe those participants had something that was quite important extra for them. Yeah. And I think, you know, taking a sort of critical stance on the pandemic, it's some of that agility that people exercised by creative agency for themselves actually had really profound impacts for other people.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a fine line there of concern about that reciprocity and charity that you mentioned earlier, and having concerns about that, but that's not how it felt. I mean, it wasn't me going and giving the charity anyway, it was the local teams working with local people, you know, with whom they'd had a long relationship before anyway. But it was like the tiniest thing that we had a duty. We had a duty to do that. They were participating and working with us all through the first 2 years. We couldn't not, you know, sustain that support.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you.
If I could pick up as well, Suzanne, on you mentioned the importance of you having had some chance to have met initially and build some bonds. And I know, I think a lot of our project work has always had the ambition that we would meet. And I know project work can happen totally in the online and people never plan to meet. But that's not been our way of doing project work. We've always wanted to meet. And I think it makes huge difference in many ways, although Alan is part of a project where, you know, he hasn't met with colleagues and we haven't met with many colleagues, and we're hoping to meet this December. But having that bond initially, you said you couldn't have done it without it.
It would have been a different thing entirely, but bringing together so many people from so many different cultural contexts and across languages together in a space, we learned so much about one another, and that was incredibly important, so that we could reference when Aldo's mum died. I knew Aldo, I could feel and reference that, you know, that kind of stuff. So it was really important.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, can we move on then? Thank you for that, Suzanne. And it kind of segues nicely into sort of Katherine's sort of area. Because for Katherine, it was looking at how the pandemic's influenced appreciation of cultural awareness and researcher sensitivities as fundamental to our international research practice partnership. So a nice segue into that, Katherine.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's there's so much richness in what you shared just now, and I actually was thinking about, you know, having sat in on so many presentations today and picking up on the issues about researcher sensitivities. So that's where I want to start really. And I was making notes throughout the day about people talking about this importance of vulnerability, the importance of voice, the importance of really trying to think about emotions, about trying to access silenced voices, of feeling the nerves, of edge walking. And actually, just last night, I was reminded about a book I've got, which is, I don't know if anyone's read a book by Ron Polias, but it's called A Methodology of the Heart. Has anyone read it? But this is not a new book, but it's a book written by someone who, as a researcher, was not wanting to hide behind this illusion of objectivity, but very much wanting to show as a researcher emotional vulnerability. And he used a very poetic voice. I do encourage someone, if you are interested, to read this book, because it's a very evocative, poetic voice of a researcher who is trying to link this importance of mind and body. And I think that's come across today as well in terms of our research sensitivities. It's not just our thinking, it's our whole self, you know, that we engage in when we're thinking about our research. And his work, Ron Polias, is trying to be fully human. He's not seeking in his research to be heard or to heard, but he challenges us to really think about what's absent from our research. And he has three main sections in the book, which is about the missing body when we think about research practice. And in this section, he's really trying to understand what's absent from our research when we don't think with our whole self. I'm not going to go into it all today because maybe I'll tempt you to read it, but he then moves on to the ideas of the playful body. And this is about trying to capture and be free to think more about our emotions, that emotional energy, and that agency that comes from that emotion. And I've seen a lot of shared emotion today. I've had lumps in my throat, we've had a few tears, and I think, you know, that's what I see this is about, but also the playfulness, you know, that curiosity, that willingness, you know, to be uncertain, to go with the messiness. And then he focuses on the aspect of the ready body, who he's talking about how as researchers we can move forward with this methodology of the heart, and think about evocative scholarship. Be more honest, be more prepared to talk about the evocativeness of our scholarship. And Lucas started us off today by talking about feeling the vibe. And I felt the vibe in your voice, I heard that, you know, and in Lynette's and in many of our speakers, in Samina's, in so many people's voices today. And I think this is that ready, you know, body that Ron Polias is talking about, and evocative scholarship, and I'm really open to that. But something else I just wanted to briefly mention, I just happened to look at University World News yesterday, University World News Africa, and an article that was shared through one of our partners actually, who's involved in a project I'm just going to briefly talk to you about. The piece that was shared was about, are we able to think beyond national boundaries? So this was about thinking of how can we, in our research practice and our educational practices, think of new models of transnational partnership, and the contribution of public higher education institutions in the global south. And it was talking about concerns of brain drain and, you know, how scholarship is able to stay in countries and not move. And Adam Habib, who's the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Witwatersrand, was talking about how we need local knowledge. And I've heard this a lot today. We need local knowledge defined by local culture through local understanding to help us reimagine higher education and ways to think about institutional capacity building globally constructed. So this is about the local, introducing the local into what we can learn about the international. And what Habib is advocating is this reimagining of higher education as a network of institutions, a network of capabilities. So how many universities are we represented here today and with international partners? And how could it be that we could think of models that would encourage a co-curriculum amongst us, co-teaching amongst us, co-credentialing amongst us, co-funding amongst us, and these ideas of split-site scholarships. So this is testing interdisciplinarity, this is testing transdisciplinarity, and in a significant way. And I felt really pleased to read this project piece because it reminded me of a project we're engaged in. Luca, Quayan, and myself, I'm sorry if I've missed other colleagues who are involved in this, but we're trying to do something where we are grounding scholarship in multiple localities because we're trying to run a doctorate programme that's being co-designed, co-delivered, co-developed amongst 3 universities, 2 in South Africa, one that you heard mention of earlier, Stellenbosch, where we actually got to go last week. Quayan and Luca and myself were very fortunate with our PhD students who are on this programme to go over to Stellenbosch. And yes, Stellenbosch is beautiful, and we did appreciate Stellenbosch, but also partnering with Walter Sisulu University, which is a historically disadvantaged university, and having been there, I understand as well that that is a very different education context. But I think what we're seeing is this opportunity for us. We're trying to work through ideas of hybrid forms of these transnational partnerships where we can do co-curriculum, where we can think about co-delivery, co-funding and co-credentials, because what we've developed is a PhD programme across 3 universities where there's 12 members of staff, predominantly from South Africa, who will hopefully get that scholarship and stay in South Africa with that knowledge. But we're all learning and we're all locating around these multiple sites. So that group will hopefully come to Coventry and they'll be able to experience our locale. We went to Stellenbosch, we'll go to Walter Sisulu as well. We should have gone there right at the beginning and we couldn't because of COVID. But I think it's just about these opportunities. I feel very privileged to be in a research centre where, you know, we've been able to get funded to try and work with these models that Habib was talking about in University World News. And they're not without their challenge and they're not without their labour, and we're learning such a lot. But I think, yeah, it's just working beyond the boundaries and that appreciation of the local to the global. So on that point, I'll just leave it there. But yeah, open again up for any questions about this idea of researcher sensitivity, which I've only really just briefly touched on. Yeah. Anyway, there was sort of a link back to doctoral education too, which I appreciate. There's a lot of doctorals attending this year. Yeah.
Thanks, Catherine.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
brilliant. I'm conscious of time.
I'm conscious
because
of time.
Time's ticking on.
Time's
We've got
ticking.
an hour. We'll never speak for an hour, and here we are. We're doing all the time. Okay, so I'm going to invite Lynette next as our guest. And Lynette, the question to Lynette is, how has researchers' awareness of their entanglements with research been influenced by the global pandemic? Lynette.
Thank you. I actually feel quite guilty because it feels as if I have spoken way too much the whole day. So I've made some notes reflecting on today. And those that know me will know that nobody can read my handwriting. So you'll have to excuse me if I try to figure out the notes that I made. So it might not even be related, but these are my thoughts. Okay, first of all, it was clear throughout the day that there's a consciousness, and I think it is as a result of COVID, of how we ourselves play a role in the research that we engage in. I became aware that many of you are conscious of issues of social justice when you engage in research. And that for me is a positive sign for the researchers of the future, and I'm so happy to acknowledge that in all of you. As a person coming from the South who was educated to think that she was a Western person, not the American version though, luckily, but being white and the privilege that comes with it, I do understand social guilt, white guilt. And I actually felt bad about constantly reminding people in the UK of the privileges that they have. So what to do in our research dealing with white guilt, European guilt, Western guilt, is something that we need to engage with. Guilt, in my view, is a really useless feeling. It takes energy and it doesn't advance anything. So when you are becoming aware of privilege, yes, certainly, don't look down on the others and think and charity by itself is of course not bad. But if charity is imposed, I will tell you what you need in research. And many recommendations that I see at the end of PhD studies is from a position as if we know more than what they know about themselves. That for me is problematic. What I loved about the work that you're doing, that wasn't charity. It was problem solving. It was do what you can with what you have, taking into account, becoming sensitive and conscious of the suffering of others. But I do, and I'm the only person from Africa at the moment. Well, there might be some of you coming from Africa as well. But I do believe that, and you can hear that Katherine and I often talk to each other, but there's agency, not only in people, but in the environment and in technology. But there's agency in people. And people on the margins need to recognize as well the hospitality that is found in the global north. Yes, the global north, shame, are stuck with their methods and their linear thinking and separating mind and body to a large extent, and I see some of the changing. Whereas people on the margins are fully conscious of their communal thinking, how mind, body and community and earth are related. And I do see that emerging. But then, the agency in people on the margins should also be that of activism and stepping forward and accepting positions in life. One of the studies that I did recently with a very good colleague of ours, Liz Marie, was actually reading university or doing analysing the discourse that goes on in University World News as opposed to University World News Africa. And we were amazed that in the mainstream University World News, there was hardly any reference to decolonizing internationalization. None. However, us Southerners, we're constantly writing about it to each other. And that doesn't advance anything. So that is where crossing borders come in. And if nothing else, and I think COVID, it was devastating, but COVID brought good things. And the good things is that without impacting on the environment, without costing a lot of money, people are able to cross borders virtually and engage in research across borders. And yes, I tell you, Ellen and I know each other very well. And today was the first time that I saw him in flesh. But we know each other well. We meet. At one stage we met almost weekly. And with that comes the opportunity for agency and for change. And I do think we need to celebrate that. I do think we need to consciously research our research. And as I've said to some of them, you as young scholars need to push the boundaries. You need to make sure that we can cite you in future in terms of changes in methodology post-COVID. And I saw much of that, and I'm looking forward to see more of that. So I think with that I need to stop, because otherwise and I haven't even looked at my notes, so there might be some things that I missed. But anyway, thank you once again.
Any comments on that? Any comments? No? Okay, brilliant. Well, that moves us nicely on to Julia. And Julia leads a theme on development, engagement and attainment. And I think that we've had a sense, or we've certainly heard, that the pandemic has had an unusually adverse effect on young people. And this is something that obviously concerns us, being involved in education. This is something that particularly, I think Julia might be able to talk about.
Yes, I do feel quite worried about following on from those talks. I feel like I'm not going to be able to be as inspiring as some of the things that we've heard today. I was particularly wanted to talk about the situations that have changed around schools. So we've heard quite a lot about students and adults, but most of my work pre-pandemic took place in schools working with children. Of course, and most of my PhD students were also in schools working with children. Of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, schools all over the world closed for several months, and that had obviously quite profound impacts on various people's research. So we had one project where we were trying out a new kind of reading intervention where we'd just got to the end of the intervention. We were going to look at how the children's reading had changed, and then the schools were closed for 3 months. I don't know. Slides. I'm going to put my... okay. And I think initially we all thought, okay, the schools are closed for a few months. In a few months' time, we'll go back in and things will go back to how they were before. And of course, that hasn't really happened. So afterwards, after the schools reopened, the schools quite rightly were focused on other things apart from research. There was a lot of emphasis on catch-up. There was a lot of restriction on visitors to the schools. There was a lot of increased stress for school leaders, which I think Megan's going to touch on. And it didn't feel, schools didn't want us there, and I don't think it was the right thing for us to be going into schools. And a lot of what we've done is had to think of different ways that we can do research. And actually that's been really interesting and valuable, I think. So several people in my team work with large data sets, and we can work with large data sets that are already collected. So we have Siobhan and working with Kat, who spoke earlier today, who look at language corpora. We have myself and Mehmet and Carlo, who are working on data, cohort data and international comparison data, and I think that can be really useful, valuable work. And I think that the COVID restrictions has actually opened our eyes to how important that data is, but also opened our eyes to lots of technological ways that we can work with young people. So certainly before the pandemic, trying to use computers in schools was pretty much a non-starter. They would either have one computer between 10 students, or it would be 20 years old, or it would be have such firewalls that it couldn't use the internet. Now it is feasible that we could use computers in schools. We can do online testing, and we can do things like ask students to have an app on a mobile phone and check in every so often, which is great. And the other thing that we've been working a lot on recently, I have one PhD student who's working on at the moment, is doing online training for teachers, which means that we can reach much wider ranges of teachers. We can be much more flexible about how we support them. So I think it's really helped us think about research in different kinds of ways. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't prepared to talk about mental health, but we can, yeah, I think this is, I can talk about that as well if you want. I think a lot of our work, so we do have some students who are particularly working on the effect of the pandemic itself on well-being and their progress, and I think we do know that it's particularly affected students with disabilities, students with disadvantage, and trying to understand how that has helped, how that has affected, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, different groups, is a really interesting area of research that we're looking at as well. Again, with a mixture of face-to-face and online methods. Okay. I'm aware time's short, so
Yeah.
we'll finish
Yeah,
up there.
thank you. Thank you. That's great. Okay, so the last of our panel members is Megan, who is sitting next to me, whose sort of focus of research probably crosses a lot of the areas that we've looked at today. So Megan is a leadership and policy person. So over to you, Megan.
Yes, and I'm the only person without any notes or any pre-planned things to say. So that's quite useful, because one of the things I've been doing today, I've got some very bad habits, but one of them is trying to do 2 or 3 things at once. And while I was tweeting about this morning, I was also trying to follow the Education Secretary talking to the Common Select Committee about education policy. And it's quite tricky to do those 2 things at once. So I hope I'm going to get this bit right. But one of the things about schools at the moment, and higher education as well, I'm just going to, in the time left, I'm just going to talk about schools and leadership and policy, is that in the last 10 years in England, there's been a huge amount of policy change in terms of the structure of the system. And what this has done has put leaders in the system under quite a lot of pressure. And in our research theme at the moment, I've sort of sneak Mehmet from Julia's theme into my theme as well. And Mehmet and myself and colleagues have just put a bid in to the Nuffield Foundation, the Leverhulme Foundation, to look at the sort of stresses and strains this puts on people who are in leadership positions. And some of you may have seen last week in the paper some of the main teacher unions writing to the Secretary of State and saying, why are we changing things again when we have been coping with COVID? And some of the things that Julia was just saying, the coping with COVID and the stresses and strains on the people in the system. And this is not just true for England as well, because in some of my networks in other parts of the world, I'm getting this feeding back that the students have had a long stressful period, the teachers have had a stressful period, and those who lead have had a stressful period. And I just want to give you one example from my own professional practice. I happen to be the chair of a multi-academy trust, nowhere around here, and we've got the most efficient CEO in the entire world, I would like to say. And what he has discovered is, and what we have discovered, something that we know but we only discover every now and again, is you cannot control life. And he has always controlled everything that happens. He's a very effective leader, and he said, my life has been out of control, and he's had to learn to accept that sometimes you can't control things. And this has happened in research. I'm looking at Andy at the back, who's been people ringing him up from the other side of the world at 2 in the morning because they forgot about the time difference when he was interviewing them. We can't control so many things, and I think with COVID and other things that are happening, leaders in the whole world have learnt that they can't keep that control that they thought they had. And this is very true, and I just want to mention to doctoral students as well, we've asked you to push the boundaries, and that's great, but also, as Lucas said, you can't do everything, so make sure you have a firm foundation before you push the boundaries. Don't try to push the boundaries while standing on one leg, because you will just fall over. So I think it's really important that this our group in leadership and policy realises the strain that people are under. My own PhD was about the emotion in leadership practice in primary schools, and we are human, and that humanity makes us the researchers and the people that we are, and I think we should acknowledge that. So I'm going to give you a top tip to finish, because I know time is pressing. I was in English literature. That was my initial degree, and I'd like to offer you the words of the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland, which is begin at the beginning, go on to the end, and then stop.
Yes.
That's a very fitting end for the day, actually. That sounds pretty appropriate. Yeah. So thank you to the panel, and thank you all for your contributions today. I don't know whether Luca wants to say anything, or colleagues want to say thank you, or.
Well, it's been an amazing day. I'm very happy, and just happy that we've been here together. And I think this is something that is very important, and something is underestimated. Just spending some pleasant time together in academia, sometimes for a bit to the last positions. It's not central. There was that metaphor of play that I use a lot, and it came up a few times during the last speeches, and it came up also during some presentation. That Bernie de Koven, who was a play theorist, says that there is a game community where the main thing is the game. If you're not good at playing the game, then you're kicked out, because the game has to go on. And then there's the play community, where the players are at the center. If the players are not enjoying it, then you change the game. And I think that's what we can try to do, and it's what, as young and early career researchers, you are in a position to do, and for people in a more advanced place is to give you the space to try and do this. And I think we tried it a bit today, and we will keep trying it a bit. We were already talking about having follow-up events, because this is a good partnership, so we will keep going with events possibly focusing on decolonization. So keep in touch, stay tuned, and hopefully we will see you again soon. But thank you so much for coming. I think we are done. We want to put up some I don't know if there's a last slide or something. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for attending. Have a day.
Yeah, safe travel.
Wow, thank you. Wonderful.